The first thing I noticed was not her face. It was the papers in her hand. I had been walking that stretch of beach for nearly an hour, letting the wind clear out the noise in my head. The ocean had a way of doing that. It didn't ask questions. It didn't care who you were or what kind of mess you had left behind at the office. It just kept rolling in, steady and patient, like it had all the time in the world. That was when I saw her. She stood near the waterline, barefoot in the sand, dressed like she had stepped out of a glass office tower and accidentally wandered into the wrong scene. Crisp white blouse, black pencil skirt, not a wrinkle on her. The wind pulled at her hair, but she didn't seem to notice. One hand held a phone. The other clutched a thin folder so tightly her knuckles looked pale. She wasn't looking at the horizon the way most people did. She was staring at it like it owed her something. I was about to pass her without a word when the wind picked up. The folder slipped. A few sheets broke loose and lifted into the air. Instinct took over. I jogged forward and caught them before the salt spray could ruin the ink. As I stacked the pages, one line caught my eye. Numbers always did that to me. They talked, even when no one else was listening. Gross margin 38%. But a quick glance at the cash flow statement told a different story. The math didn't match, not even close. There was a hole in it, buried under operating expenses, big enough to swallow a couple million without anyone noticing. Or maybe someone was hoping no one would. I held the top page steady against the wind and looked up at her. "Your margin doesn't line up with your cash flow," I said. "Someone's hiding a pretty big problem in the expenses." Her head turned fast. The sunglasses dipped just enough for me to see her eyes. Sharp, alert. The kind of eyes that measured people in seconds. "What did you say?" she asked quietly. "It could be timing," I said, "but it doesn't look like it. More like someone smoothing the revenue while burying a $2 million drain." She studied me for a moment. The ocean moved behind her, steady and calm, but there was nothing calm about the look she gave me. "Who are you?" "Colby Sanchez." She didn't shake my hand, just kept watching me like I was a line item she hadn't approved. "And you saw that in a few seconds?" "I've spent a lot of years cleaning up numbers that start exactly like this." I pointed to the footer of the sheet. "Whoever built this used the wrong depreciation schedule. It makes the margin look healthy while the company bleeds cash." The folder in her hand stopped trembling. Her voice softened, but it didn't lose its edge. "Do you have a card?" "I'm on vacation," I said, glancing back at the water. "Then your vacation just ended." She took the papers from me, slid them into the folder, and looked straight into my eyes. "Do you know who I am?" "Juliana Anderson," I said. "Anderson Media." For the first time her mouth shifted. Not quite a smile. More like surprise that someone recognized her without the boardroom around her. "My CFO resigned this morning," she said, "and a board member is calling for an audit. If he proves incompetence, I lose my seat. If I lose my seat, I lose the company." The waves kept rolling in, quiet and steady, like none of it mattered, but the way she said it sounded less like a business problem and more like someone trying not to drown. She took a step toward the path off the beach, then paused and looked back at me. "And Colby," she said calmly, "my eyes are up here." I froze, more from the weight of her presence than the words. "Yes, ma'am," I said. She nodded once and kept walking, and without quite knowing why, I followed. Her suite sat just off the beach, tucked behind tall hedges that kept the world at a polite distance. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and something colder, like polished stone. The kind of place that looked simple until you realized how carefully everything had been chosen. She kicked off her heels near the door and stood a little straighter without them. Not smaller, just more grounded. Like she trusted the floor beneath her more than the room around her. "The board vote is in 48 hours, she said, setting the folder down on a glass table covered in neatly stacked documents. "Tristan claims I mishandled acquisition funds." I took a seat across from her, opening my laptop but not turning it on yet. "You brought financial statements to the beach," I said. "That tells me you already knew something was wrong." She didn't deny it, just folded her arms and looked past me for a moment like the answer was sitting somewhere on the wall. "I needed air," she said, "and I needed someone who wouldn't flinch." That stayed with me, not flinch. She explained how she'd put out a quiet request through a crisis network. No job posting, no interviews, just names. I was the only one nearby who answered fast. You tested me, I said, letting the papers fall. She nodded once. If you hadn't seen the hole, you would have kept walking. I turned the laptop toward her. I'll need read-only access first. Let me prove the problem is real before we go any further. She hesitated, just a breath, then nodded. Read-only, today. The room settled into a quiet hum. Keys tapping, pages sliding. Outside, the ocean kept up its slow rhythm like it didn't care who won or lost inside these walls. After a while, I noticed her hand shaking slightly as she checked her phone. Subtle, but there. You haven't eaten, I said. Her eyes lifted, sharp again. Are you telling me what to do? I'm telling you what the numbers can't, I replied. You're running on fumes. She studied me for a long moment, then surprised me with a tired half-smile. Pizza? Protein, I said, and coffee, black. She ordered without arguing. By midnight, the table was buried in paper. Sleeves rolled up, hair loosened. She looked less like the woman from the beach and more like someone who had been carrying too much for too long. At 12:17, I stopped typing. There, I said quietly. She leaned in beside me, close enough that I could hear her breathing change as she followed the screen. The hole wasn't imaginary, and it wasn't hers. She straightened slowly. Can you prove who did it? Not yet, I said, but I know where to look next. She nodded, eyes steady again. Then keep going. And for the first time that night, the room felt a little lighter, like someone had opened a window you didn't know was stuck. She didn't rush me after that. That told me more than anything else could. Juliana moved to the far side of the table and began sorting papers into careful stacks. Not busy work. Purposeful. The kind of movement people make when they're trying to stay steady. Every so often, she would glance my way, not to check my progress, but like she was listening for something to break. I kept working. The problem wasn't loud. It never is. It was buried in small choices. A classification here, a timing shift there. Nothing that would raise alarms on its own. But together they told a story, and it wasn't a kind one. This payment, I said finally, sliding a page toward her. It's being logged as operating expense. She leaned in. That vendor is tied to the acquisition. Exactly, I said, which means someone moved it on purpose, not to steal outright, to confuse. Her jaw tightened, not anger, focus. If the board sees this, she said slowly, they'll think I signed off on it. They'll think that, I agreed, until they see who actually touched the entries. I paused, choosing my words carefully. For that, I'll need more access. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the window and stood there, barefoot on the cool floor, looking out at the dark ocean. The lights from the shore reflected faintly on the glass, but her face stayed in shadow. When I built this company, she said quietly, I promised myself I would never give anyone blind trust. She turned back to me then. And yet here we are. She returned to the table, picked up a form from a leather folder, and signed it without ceremony. Then she slid it across to me. Time limited, she said. Logged. Legal copied. I nodded. Clean and proper. That's the only way I know how to live, she replied. The room went quiet again. The pizza sat untouched on the counter, growing cold. Neither of us noticed. As I worked through the logs, the pattern sharpened. Names repeated. Access times clustered. A shadow moving through the system with confidence. Someone who knew exactly how far to go without leaving footprints. At last I looked up. It's not random, I said. It's deliberate. She didn't flinch. Then show me, she said. And in that moment, standing there in the quiet hum of the room, I realized something had shifted. Not just in the numbers. Between us, this wasn't a job anymore. It was a shared weight. By the time the sky outside began to lighten, neither of us had slept. The ocean had gone quiet, like it was holding its breath. Inside the suite, the only sounds were the low hum of electronics and the slow turning of paper. Juliana worked across from me, glasses on now, hair pulled back without thinking about it. She looked less like a headline and more like a person who had been awake too long with something heavy on her mind. I finally found the thread that tied it all together. It's not just one entry, I said, keeping my voice low. It's a pattern. She pushed her chair closer, resting her elbows on the table. Show me. I walked her through it slowly, the same vendor ID appearing under different labels. Payments rerouted just enough to blur their trail. Each move small, careful, smart. The kind of work done by someone who knew the system and trusted they wouldn't be questioned. This wasn't about stealing fast, I said. It was about control, making it look like chaos so blame could land anywhere. Her mouth tightened. Including me. Yes. She leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment. Just a breath. When she opened them again, there was no panic there. Only resolve. Can you prove who did it? She asked. I can, I said, but once we do, there's no quiet way out. She nodded. There hasn't been a quiet way out for a while. Later that morning, we were back in Manhattan. The city felt louder after the beach, sharper. The tower of Anderson Media rose ahead of us, all glass and confidence. Juliana walked through the lobby like she always did. Steady. Controlled. But I noticed how her shoulders didn't tense this time. She knew where she was headed. In her office, she stood by the window looking down at the streets below. Cars moved like they had somewhere important to be. She watched them for a long moment before speaking. They'll try to rush this, she said. Force a vote before the truth has time to settle. Then we don't rush, I replied. We stay clean, we stay ahead. She turned to me then, really looking at me. I don't like relying on people, she said quietly. I know, I said. That's why this works. She nodded once, and outside, the city kept moving, unaware that something steady and unmovable had just been set in place. The board meeting was set for the following afternoon. By then, the city had settled into a gray, rainy stillness. The kind that makes everything feel heavier than it already is. Juliana arrived early, carrying a thin folder under her arm. No extra papers, no dramatic displays, just what was needed. I sat farther back, laptop closed, listening more than watching. The room filled slowly. Familiar faces, polite nods, quiet tension. Tristan White took a seat near the end of the table. He looked calm enough, but his foot tapped under the table, a small tell he probably didn't realize he had. Juliana stood when everyone was seated. She didn't clear her throat. She didn't raise her voice. Thank you for coming, she said evenly. I want to address the concerns raised about our acquisition funds. She laid everything out in plain language. No accusations at first, just facts. Dates, entries, patterns. I watched the room shift as people followed along. Heads tilted. Pens paused. Someone stopped flipping pages. Then she showed them the logs. The room went quiet in a different way, not confusion, recognition. These entries were reclassified, she said. Not by mistake, by design. Her eyes moved to Tristan. She didn't glare. She didn't need to. He tried to speak. The words came out wrong, defensive, rushed. The chair interrupted him gently. We'll let her finish. Juliana did, calm, precise. She didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't offer excuses. I'm not resigning, she said at the end, not when the truth is this clear. No one argued. The meeting ended without a vote. They needed time, everyone did. Back in her office, Juliana stood by the window again, rain streaking the glass. She looked tired now. Not weak. Just human. Did I do the right thing? She asked quietly. Yes, I said. You didn't blink. She let out a slow breath. I don't know how to stop, she said. Not when everything feels like it could disappear. You don't have to stop, I replied. You just don't have to carry it alone. She nodded once and stayed looking out at the city. The storm outside eased a little, not gone, just quieter. The waiting was the hardest part. Not the work, not the meetings, not even the quiet looks exchanged in hallways. It was the hours in between, when nothing moved, and everything felt heavy. The board took 2 days to review the findings. 2 days where phones buzzed and stopped. 2 days where no one said much out loud. Juliana stayed busy. That was her way. Calls with legal, short updates with her team, everything calm on the surface. But I noticed the small things, how she stood a little longer at the window, how her coffee went untouched more often than not. Late on the second evening, we were back in her office. The city lights were coming on, one by one, like a slow reminder that life didn't pause for anyone. They'll vote in the morning, she said. No matter how it goes, I want to thank you. I shook my head, not yet. She gave a tired smile. You don't like endings. I like them honest, I said. She studied me for a moment, then looked away. I've spent so long being careful, she said, making sure no one saw doubt or fear. And now, I asked. Now I'm tired, she admitted, but I'm still standing. That night, I stayed longer than planned. Not because I was needed, but because neither of us wanted to be alone with our thoughts. We talked about small things. Where we grew up. How work finds you even when you don't invite it. Nothing important, and yet it felt like everything. In the morning, the board's decision came quietly. Tristan was removed, his access revoked. The findings would be disclosed, clean and complete. Juliana would remain. She didn't celebrate. She didn't smile wide or raise her voice. She sat down in her chair and closed her eyes for just a second. When she opened them, there was relief there. And something else. Space. It's over, she said. For now, I replied. She looked at me then, really looked at me. You didn't have to stay. I know. Why did you? I thought about it before answering. Because sometimes people don't need fixing, I said. They just need someone to stand next to them while they hold the line. She nodded slowly. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, something finally let go. That evening, the building felt different. Quieter. Not because people were gone, but because the tension had finally loosened its grip. Juliana stood in her office with the lights dimmed, the city glowing softly through the windows. No papers in her hands this time. No phone. Just her and the view she had stared at so many times while caring more than anyone knew. You're still here, she said, not turning around. I figured I'd say goodbye properly, I replied. She smiled at that. Not the kind meant for meetings or cameras. The tired, honest kind. For a while there, she said, I thought if I stopped moving, everything would fall apart. But it didn't, I said. No, she agreed, it didn't. She turned to face me then. The sharp edge she carried when we first met was still there, but softer now. Like a blade finally sheathed. She looked relieved, grounded, human. I don't say this often, she said slowly, but I couldn't have done this alone. I nodded. You already did the hardest part. You stayed true to yourself. She took that in quietly. We stood there for a moment, the hum of the city filling the space between us. It wasn't awkward. It felt earned. Like the calm that comes after a long storm, when you finally trust the ground beneath your feet again. So, she said, what happens next for you? I go back to my quiet life, I said. Walk beaches, fix problems. Try not to interrupt sunsets. She smiled again. You're welcome back here, she said, anytime. I know, I replied, but tonight feels like a good place to stop. She walked me to the door. No rush, no need for more words. At the threshold, she paused. Thank you, she said. Not as a CEO, not as a client, just as a person. I nodded once and stepped out into the hall. Later, as I walked outside, the city air felt lighter. Somewhere far away, waves were still rolling in, steady and patient. The same way they always had. And I thought about how some moments don't shout. They just settle in quietly, staying with you long after you leave the porch behind. If this story lingered with you, you're welcome to stay a while. There's always another quiet truth waiting just beyond the porch.